Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Skip Rutherford, Dean of the Clinton School, and I want to welcome you today to this panel discussion to analyze the September 13th Little Rock sales tax election. Could I please ask everyone to turn your cell phones and other electronic devices off? A special thanks to Nikolai DePippa for another great program, and special thanks to our volunteers who help make all these programs possible. We couldn't do it without them. Early voting began today on 2 ballot proposals. Voting will continue through Monday with the early voting, and then the election Tuesday that will be held in, I think, over 60 different locations. Little Rock voters are asked to vote for or against on 2 proposals. 1, the adoption of a 3/8% or 0.375 local sales and compensating use tax within the city of Little Rock for capital improvements of a public nature, with this tax to expire in 2021. Number 2, adoption of a 5/8% or 0.625% local sales and compensating use tax within the city of Little Rock for the purpose of general operations. Those are the ballot issues. I want to welcome our panelists to discuss and to analyze this election. First of all, let me introduce Molly McGowan, a concurrent student here at the Clinton School who's also pursuing her joint degree at the UALR William H. Bowen School of Law. She's a graduate of Little Rock Central High School, has been very involved in Little Rock issues and in political issues. She bears a famous last name and knows politics very well. Dr. Bobby Roberts, the director of the Central Arkansas Library System, which has endorsed this millage campaign. But Bobby's here today to analyze the campaign and the prospects from his experiences as running and being a part of several millage campaigns. Bill Vickery, conservative political strategist and very involved in numerous campaigns and elections, providing some insight that perhaps doesn't normally show up at Clinton School programs. Except when we had Wayne LaPierre, the head of the National Rifle Association, here. Just kidding. Bill's viewpoint, very important, particularly relating to what he's hearing from the Tea Party. And Carol Willis, a political strategist who has been involved with the campaigns of Bill Clinton, worked extensively with the Democratic National Committee, and now works with Governor Mike Beebe. Probably no better grassroots person in Arkansas than this guy. So we have 4 very talented people, all with great perspectives of Little Rock, but also with some personal perspectives of their own. So let me start with you, Dr. Roberts, and then we'll pass this around. What are you hearing?
Skip, I don't talk to a whole lot of people about the election, but my sense is that the city did a good job, I think, in the hearings of getting people to understand that the city needs money. I think that's the first step that they need to do. And I don't talk to anyone for or against this, even the comments you see in the paper that don't say that the city needs money. That's the good news. And the polls look good, and I would assume this has a good chance of passing. But I still don't hear a lot of enthusiasm for people for voting for it. Even people, friends of mine who say they're going to vote for it, they don't seem to have a spark about it. Maybe they'll get that now that the election, early voting is going on, and they'll begin to think more about it, and they'll begin to see really what's at stake here. But you know, I hear a lot of people saying the city needs the money, but I don't hear a lot of people just saying, I can't wait to go down there and vote for it. And that's always a problem.
Molly?
Thanks, Dean. First of all, I have to admit I feel a bit inadequate up here with this panel of experts. We've got Bobby Roberts to my right, the king of millage passing in Little Rock, And Carol Willis and Bill Vickery, both political gurus who are noted and respected. So I am by far the least experienced, and I have to say the youth is a hard age to pinpoint. For purposes of this panel preparation, I defined it as roughly 18 to 30-year-olds. And I've talked to a lot of different folks, and the general consensus I can see is many, unfortunately, are not that interested. But the people who are interested are the folks who are politically and actively engaged otherwise. And those people, I do think, have a bit of a spark. I want to commend the proponents. I think they've done an excellent job of really trying to target young people and emphasize the importance of this election for our generation and the future of Little Rock. They've held events catering towards young folks, information sessions at Juanita's. They're active on Facebook and Twitter. So besides just the pamphlets that frequent voters get, they've really tried to engage this age group. But I think it may be an uphill battle just because the opposition has an easier message that, don't triple our tax. And for those of us who are looking for jobs or worried about supporting ourselves in this age group, tend to cling towards that message above all.
Thank you. Mr. Willis?
Thank you, Skip. Does this work? Well, the group of people that I talk to are varied. I live in the central part of Little Rock. I live between the Quapaw area and High Street, so I'm in the middle of the city. On one side, people are enthused about it, the Quapaw area, which will probably get out and vote. On the other side, people see the tax as a regressive tool, and they don't think they'll get much out of it. Now, on whole, I think the vast majority of people think that in order for the city to move forward, that you're going to have to do something. When you look at the streets and the waters, the sewers, and the police protection and the fire protection and all of that, I think most people are in favor of that. The issue is, how do we pay for it and who pay for it? I think people are looking for equitable distribution of who pays for this tax. Obviously, people that are middle class or upper middle class can pay for it a lot easier and a lot better than people that have lesser means. But at the same time, people with lesser means understand that they have to be protected by the police and the fire, and that their sewage and the drainages need to be work as well as anybody else. When I talk to my Tea Party friends, they generally say that we're just across the board anti-tax. Now, that's not all of my Tea Party friends. Some understand that that taxes are a necessity, and not all are necessary following the national line and the debate of the national parties. I think Little Rock is in a unique position to be the queen city of the state of Arkansas and to be the queen city of the South as far as taking progressive measures and moving forward for all of its citizens. I'm talking about middle class folks, I'm talking about poor folks, I'm talking about minorities, I'm talking about opportunities for women and other individuals. And I talk to a lot of people, and you get these mixed emotion. I think you are in an uphill battle, and I think it's going to depend upon turnout and how we can get people to turn out. I also think that it has to be a partnership. I don't think it can be passed just by middle class or upper middle class people. I think there has to be a partnership involved in this thing in order for people to buy into this thing 100%.
Thanks. Bill?
First of all, I thought I was brought here to speak about the youth vote. And let me encourage Molly to raise your definition up to the early 40s. When you talk about young people. We don't need any comments out of you, Ms. Street. You know, Skip, I have found that when you ask the question, what are you hearing from most political people, I see in this room most of the people that I talk to about politics. And with all due respect to them, they really don't know anything. So the worst thing I think you can do in the business of politics is to take your direction from that small group of people who we all love it and eat it and breathe it and dig so deep into it that we see the third level of nuance to an idea, when in reality, that's not who shows up and votes in America. And so I think there are three voters in this race in the city of Little Rock. They're the people that are activated to go vote by the campaign. They're the people that would vote for it, but just aren't that excited about it for whatever reason and don't show up and vote. And then there are people that are going to be actively opposed to it. And the people on that end, the active opposition, they define politics by what they see at the national level. In other words, they get their news from Fox News, or they get their news from CNN, or they occasionally listen to NPR, or they engage at that level. But they define their attitude toward politics based on what they see at the national level. And so the person who shows up and votes no on this issue probably can't explain in great detail what the money would go for, where Little Rock is relative to other cities in terms of millage, or the highly sophisticated calculus that goes into 0.875 times pi squared third of a sales tax percentage. What they do feel, though, in their gut is they feel like, look, we're taxed to death. If they've got a job, they're scared they're going to lose it. If they don't have a job, they believe they're never going to get another one. They've tapped out their savings, what savings they did have, and they're worried. And so when they see tax increases, when they see anything of an increased nature, they react negatively because they anticipate, look, I've got to tighten my belt. Why can't government do the same? And so they define the way that they feel about local politics by what they see at a national level. They may benefit from it. You may actually go and have a legitimate argument and say, do you realize that for what you pay in a tax, you're going to get these services? You see, and I've seen reams of polling data and focus groups at the national level and in different communities around America, and you know, it's interesting. Everybody always says you go into a new town to do it, well, you know, Omaha's different, or well, you know, Kansas City's different, or well, you know, Atlanta's very different. Nah, but really it's not, because you have an active group of people out here who genuinely operate at the grassroots level, who feel very focused and very driven now and have gotten a taste of some success and are really ginned up by that. And so they're engaged. They're engaged. They don't want to vote for something because they're going to get something. They would only vote for something if they fear they are losing something. So that kind of sentiment makes it very difficult to pass a tax of this nature in that sort of political climate, the way it's dominated in terms of the national perspective. So,
All right, the internal telephone polls of the pro-tax campaign are showing 60% and even higher approval of the votes of the phones they're calling. A recent robo poll from the Arkansas Times and Impact Management showed it passing with 60%. Do you think these two measures are going to pass with 60% of the vote? And if no, what do you think, will they pass, and what would you guess the margin might be? Start with you, Molly.
Okay. I was hoping we were going to start this way, but I think 60 is a bit high. I mean, as much as I think that would be wonderful, I think that I predict it will pass, but by a much closer margin. So, you know, 51-49 or 52-48, somewhere around there.
Bobby?
Let me give you my model for what happens in tax races in Little Rock. Might help you understand this. Am I not talking into, can you hear me? Let me give you my model. We've run 15 millage races in the last 22 years, 8 or 9 of them in Little Rock. And I've looked at tax races in Little Rock going back at least 50 years. And here's what you see in them, and here's the model I keep in mind when we're running a race. If you think of the area north of 630 and you put a right triangle on it on the eastern end of the city, over at the Heights and Hillcrest, those are high voting areas and high pro-tax areas. And as you run that triangle out, as it runs toward its acute end out in West Little Rock, you got a lot of people out there, but you got less support for taxes. And then you've got an equilateral triangle in Little Rock that runs south of 630, and you look at the precincts predominantly African-American that run right along 630, and then you run that triangle down to its point down in southwest Little Rock, you have less voters in that triangle. You have a fair amount of African-Americans that do, in fact, vote for taxes, and very few precincts, anyway, in southwest Little Rock ever vote for taxes. And I can tell you what, we run 8 elections in Little Rock, and we've carried 1 precinct in 1 election in southwest Little Rock. So it's a tough area to run in. Now, having said that, you don't want to get your brains beaten out in any of them. You've got to run above 60% in that high part of that right triangle up in the Heights and Hillcrest. I think that the African-American vote has largely been sacrificed in this race. At least, and I'm speaking from the experience of the library, we do there because we do well in the African-American community because we provide a lot of services to African-Americans through the library. So we have a base. It seems to me that that's going to be difficult for this pro-tax group to pick up. Southwest Little Rock, you just can't, you got to get above 40% in Southwest Little Rock or you'll lose. So I think to win the race, if you're thinking about turning out 15 or 20,000 people, you've got to do relatively better than the library would do in West Little Rock, not get killed in Southwest Little Rock, and get above 60% in most of those precincts in the Heights and Hillcrest. They do that, they're going to win. I think the 62% poll is high because if you look at the one that the Times ran, it's mostly Democrats, it's mostly women who both tend to vote for taxes more than men. And so those numbers are skewed, but I think they're going to pass that operational tax. The capital tax a little bit different. The last time they ran a capital tax was in 2003, I think. They voted 10,000 people in it and they lost. The last time they ran a race like this was in 1993, and they ran I think it was a half-cent, I believe it was a half-cent operational tax and a penny capital tax. They lost the capital tax and they won the operational tax. And that could be what happens this time, which is ass backwards, as I might say, what usually happens. We've never lost a bond issue, and we've lost 4 operational issues because most people don't want to vote on those permanent taxes. So this one seems to me to be kind of turned on its head, but I really think it's going to turn on those 12 or 14 precincts in West Little Rock, and there are 2 unknowns to me in this race. One is social networking. We've really never run a race where social networking was as powerful as it is now, and we don't know what that would be. And the other one, Bill, I think is the Tea Party. I think they've not been engaged in an issue in Little Rock. They are opposed to this. If you go on YouTube, you can see some of their comments, but they're an unknown quantity. So you got two things out there that I think it's hard to predict, and that could skew this election either way. But my sense is they're going to get in the above 55% on that operational side, and that other one's going to be a horse race, I really think.
Mr. Willis?
Well, I think the 62% is a little out of line too. My guess it was to be anywhere from 54 to 55% for some of the reasons that Bobby has elaborated on. One, I think it's going to be a question of turnout. The other is going to be the anti-tax mood a la the Tea Party that's across the country. And one of the things I think we all have to understand is polls never vote. It's just a glitch in time, and it could change. I think that the proponents can sell this proposal to minority communities and poor communities with an aggressive grassroots campaign. You got to explain to people, what am I going to get out of this thing specifically? If you're going to do a research park, I mean, what does the minority community get out of it? If you're going to do it with UALR, how do you include Philander Smith, Arkansas Baptist, or UAPB? You got to break this thing down into an individual choice. Nobody's in favor of taxes, but I found out that the average citizen is willing to pay for something if they get something in return. And again, I think the selling of the city itself and what the city is and what it can easily become. We can always, I mean, all of us in Arkansas have always been trying to destroy the notion that we're the city of Central High School. I think we've came a long ways in destroying that. I think both the mayor and the city manager are microcosms of that progress. I think we've done a fairly good job in this city. It might not be the best, but it's pretty close. And I think, again, you got to say to the rest of the world and the rest of the state that this is the Queen City of Arkansas. Well, so goes Little Rock, so goes the rest of Arkansas. But you got to be all inclusive. When I say inclusive, I don't necessarily mean just black folks or Hispanic folks, women. I'm talking about poor folks, people across the board who are not going to be at this meeting and who's going to have to be influenced in another way. As Vickery already said, most of the people here have made up their mind. They come here to listen to us pontificate a little bit and espouse our expert opinion. But the real people that are going to have to make the decision are still out there in the streets. And my guess is the vast majority have not even tuned into what this election is all about. So I think it's going to take a selling job on the part of the proponents as well as the individuals that are against. I don't think people vote or just no for the sake of voting no. There has to be a reason for them voting no against an issue as opposed to them voting for an issue. I think you got an uphill battle. I don't think it's, I think you can overcome it, but I still think you got to say to Joe Blow or John Q. Public out here on 12th Street, or to somebody in the Quapaw area, or somebody that's in the Heights, to the community out in Southwest Little Rock, this is how this benefits you, 1, 2, 3, 4. Also, this is how this may not benefit you, 1, 2, 3, 4, and let them make a decision and weigh with the check and balances as to what they think is better for them. And you got to look, you got to be futuristic about it. If I look across this crowd, most of us in here got gray hair. I mean, you got to look into what these young people think about this. You got to get these people involved in this thing. They are the future of the city. They're the future of the state. If we do not get some enthusiastic opinions and activity by these people, even if we pass the tax, we still gonna have a hard problem implementing it, because once it's been passed, you still have to have implementation of it. And if you don't have implementation of it, then all of us have wasted a bunch of time and a bunch of energy, because the end results would not be what we're necessarily looking for.
Bill?
Thank you, Doctor. Well, okay. I guess I get the last word on this whole thing. I think they'll both fail. Having said that, let me explain that I think the campaign that has been run so far has been the perfect campaign to run to pass a tax increase in this political environment. I don't know who's doing it. And, you know, the mayor's my friend of 25 years, who I love like a brother. Anytime somebody says that, by the way, you know the setup is coming, right? Exactly. So I think the campaign has been the perfect campaign. There's a sweet spot with these kinds of campaigns that you have to hit, where you activate the people who want to vote for you, and you don't wake up the people who would naturally be opposed to you. So when you hear sort of the general, well, I don't hear a lot of people excited about this or that. To get people excited about something, you have to raise the profile of it, and you have to do it from an emotional level. That also raises the profile against it. And I think this campaign made and I'm just saying this as an outsider, made a strategic decision, and in my opinion, it was a brilliant one, to try to reach out through purely invasive, very surgical strikes, mail, social networking, things of that nature. They're not on the radio. They're not, as UALR would say, they're not mass communicating, but they're highly surgical in the strikes that they're trying to do to turn out the votes. So I think that's the kind of campaign you have to run. I think it's been a brilliant campaign that has been that could be very effective. If it passes, I think you can all put it back on that strategy and say that it was a real stroke of brilliance. Having said that, I don't think it's going to pass. I go back to what I said earlier. I think people tend to take especially this anti-tax move, not just anti-tax, there is a I'm sick of it sort of perspective that's out there. And you see this a lot when people are asked, well, what would you be for? Well, I'm just for slowing everything down. I'm for stopping everything. So you have a big percentage of these folks, Tea Party people, but it extends beyond that. It extends into that middle-class family who they're worried. They're worried about losing their job. They've worked at XYZ for 23 years, and they're concerned that they may lose their job. So there is a real hesitancy amongst the populace out there to be for stuff because they don't know what they're getting. They're not going and buying a washing machine So doesn't it then hold true that they wouldn't necessarily show up and vote for a tax increase? And there's a concern about their economic future. And so that translates into how they perceive things at the state, federal, and local level. The second part is, when you run a campaign with a strategy like I described earlier, why it is the perfect strategy, you do leave some change on the table. You leave some money on the table. You've got to, maybe you don't reach out to some folks that would show up and vote and say, you know what, we do need a new police station. And it is embarrassing that we've got a fire truck that we can't even use. And that that there is real concern about basic city services. I think people show up also, by the way, I don't know that they're going to differentiate between the two. I think it is the highly sophisticated voter whose minds are made up, many of you in this room, a long time ago, that digs through the nuances of these kind of proposals. The other 90% of us show up and vote based on how we feel about taxes that day, or how the city is performing, or whether or not we're worried about our car being broken into or our house burning down. So I think the motivation for that middle group that I discussed earlier, who may or may not show up and vote, I don't know that the motivation is there for them to show up and vote, and that skews the percentages towards the anti-side.
Okay, the final week of the campaign, the voting started today, the big voting is next Tuesday. Someone asked you, which I'm getting ready to do, what is the most compelling argument to vote for it? What is the most compelling argument to vote against it? Bobby, you want to start?
I was afraid you'd pick me. I'm not sure what argument I would make. What I'd like to do is comment on what Bill said, and I think he's right on two things. The time you want to run an election, if you can pick the time you're going to run your election, that's what you want to be able to do. The city didn't have that luxury because of just falling revenue, so they couldn't do that. But the ideal time to run an election is when it's a little rising tide where people are in a little bit better mood. We've always looked out there and thought, let's pick a time, if we can't pick a time when the economy's good, let's run it in the spring where everybody's in a good mood, or a fine fall day like today. You don't control all of that, but I think that's important. And I agree with Bill. I think this is a masterful campaign at targeting those frequent voters and trying to get them out. It's predicated on the idea that you won't turn out over about 15 or 20,000 people. If you turn out more than that, and I think they will, you begin to get into the problem Bill's talking about, is you begin to turn out people that might be for you, but they don't know they're for you because they haven't been told any reason to be for you. If I were running the campaign, and I'm not involved in it in any way, nobody's talked to me about it, but I would hedge my bet starting today or tomorrow. You would see some ads on cable TV and some ads on radio where you've got good demographics, and I'd be running them on the History Channel and A&E and places like that where I might pick up some of my demographics. I wouldn't run them on Fox. Watch where you run them and try to reach out to those people Bill are talking about that are still out there. I would hedge my bet in this election. The compelling issue I think about it is the fact that the city is out of money, and even the opposition admits that. We are out of money, and you cannot run the city on nothing. The downside of it, I think, probably is the economic development issue. It shouldn't be. I bet it polls pretty good, but I think people are talking about jobs. And let me say one other thing, and then I'll shut up and let somebody else talk. But I think you traditionally can stack the city up in three piles of things that it does. You've got the necessary services, fire, police, and roads, which we all know we have to have and we support. You've got the regulatory part of it, which everybody hates, but you can't have a city without it. And you've got the quality of life issues, the parks, the libraries, and the schools, which is what people want to support. Typically, you never pick the regulations because nobody's going to vote for them. But you either run on the necessities or you run on the quality of life. I prefer a quality of life race, frankly, because I think it's easier to appeal to people's better angels. And that's what that does. But we have a fourth piece in here which is relatively new at the local level, and that's economic development. I happen to think it's a good thing, and I support it. I support the tech campus, the research park. I think we need to do it. I don't think it was sold to the public very well. But to me, that's the most difficult thing in the next 4 or 5 days, I think, is trying to define that better for the public so that they understand why this is a very important, and albeit it's a long-term solution to our problems, but it's something we need to do. I my fear, if I were the proponents, would be we're going to turn out more than 20,000 people, and we're going to turn out 5,000 or 6,000 people that we haven't talked to. And if you haven't talked to a voter, they're likely to vote no because they don't understand it. So I think I would put out a marker somewhere out there to run some ads in the last 3 or 4 days.
Anybody else want to comment on, Carol?
Let me just say this. I think what the city has to say is that I'm going to enhance my city services. I'm going to do a better job with what I already have, and I'm going to amplify. This money is going to make me amplify my basic city services. People knock on my door and want to know why is my bank on Roosevelt Road closing. They want to know why I got to go all the way out to West Little Rock to go to Walmart, to go to Kroger, or the Safeway. I think you got to go into each one of these neighborhoods and say, I'm going to remove this blighted housing from your neighborhood. I think you got to sell each neighborhood on a different set, a different agenda, because each neighborhood has a different agenda. A blighted neighborhood is not necessarily a problem in West Little Rock, but to the little old lady who lives 5 houses down from me, where there's a house that a bunch of boys hang out smoking a little crack and a little marijuana, that's a major problem for them. It's a problem for these people who have to get on a bus to do their banking or to go to Walmart or go to Kroger. And they think that the city can control a lot of this. Now, some of it you can, some of it you can't. But I think that you can say to people that I promise to make an effort with this newfound revenue, that at least I can take this opportunity to try and make it better. I think the proponents of this thing has to go into each neighborhood. You've got to talk to people who can carry the water for you to some degree, people with credibility and with people with understanding. Because the average Joe Blow, I guarantee you, ain't got a clue of what this election is all about. Somebody has got to explain it to it. Now, the downside of that is you get people voting against you just for the mere fact that they voting against you. They voting anti-tax. Doesn't necessarily mean that if you vote for this tax, that sewer in front of my house, that drain is going to be unclogged. You got to say to these people that this guy that's hanging out down the corner, if I got a police station or substation within a block, that person is not going to be standing there. That if my house catches on fire, there's a fire station within a half a mile or within 10 blocks of where I am. They understand that kind of thing. The economic development aspect of it is simple. Everybody understands the job. You got to say, how are we going to get this job? If you're going to have 2,000 jobs, where are they going to come from? Who you going to employ? What's going to be the qualification of those individuals? When you start talking about 50 new policemen, how many of them going to be Hispanic? How many of them going to be black? How many of them going to be sensitive to people in my community? I want to know who my local policeman is. I don't necessarily want to see a guy just riding through my community, but if I got a substation there, I can walk up to the substation and have a conversation with this guy, and he knows who I am. He knows that I live in my house by myself. He knows that I come home at midnight sometimes, and I'm by myself. And that these guys, it's a personal touch. I mean, I think government has to go back to doing what government used to do and not become such this big ogre up at the top who dictates to people what they should do, but government should be an instrument of service. If you get that, I think you can convince a whole bunch of people. You can move up to my guess of 54% to maybe 55 to 60% if people have an understanding of what the issues are. And it's been my experience in politics for some 35 years that average Joe Blow ain't got a clue about what they're voting for. They either vote for something or they're voting against it. And the people in the middle is where you really want to come down. Everybody here has already made up their mind. My guess is nobody in here we can convince one way or the other. But your voters, as Dr. Roberts already said, and as Vickery has said too, they are still out there. Those are the people that we got to make the impression upon.
Bill?
First of all, Carol is the new spokesman for the Bachmann campaign. If you saw that making government more, just kidding. First of all, if I were running the campaign against this, I would get Metro Plan to announce a $70 million expansion of the trolley. Now, I don't even say that tongue in cheek. I say that seriously. And I mean, you can shake your heads and you can boo if you want to, but it's a boondoggle. And what it does, it goes to the heart of faith in how the money's going to be spent. I can't tell you the percentage that's going to be spent on economic development or this or that or the other thing. In politics, we trust people to do stuff. And that's a boondoggle. And to have Metro Plan announce that they're looking at studying a $70 million expansion of this thing that a lot of people look toward as a total waste of time and money, even though, you can give me the argument that it was federal funds and it did this or that. It's all the same pot of money. If I'm going to show up and vote against something, I'm using that as an example to say, see, I knew it. This isn't about, you know, fire stations and police, exactly what Carol just said, which is what it really is about. This is about this other thing. So that's what I would do if I was going to running the campaign against it. Now, for it, I would take a combination of what Bobby and Carol just said, and I call that the chicken in every pot sort of closing strategy, where you take a credible person like the mayor or someone of that nature, and you say, look, I promise you we're going to spend this money the right way. You make an emotional plea. You don't talk about the good that's going to come out of it. You say, if you give us this money, you're going to get a lot in return for it. I promise you. You have someone put a guarantee on it so that there's someone to hold accountable, so that those folks that may show up and vote against it either choose to not vote, or you might even flip a few. You take them from against it to undecided to for, or you inspire some of these folks who maybe don't know a whole lot about it, but they say, okay, if this is screwed up, this is the guy we can blame. So that you give them an emotional attachment and someone to hold accountable for it. And that's a powerful thing. You can make an argument about exactly the stratification of the revenue and all that, but it's a powerful emotional tool to tell someone, I promise you, I will do the right thing, this will be spent exactly the way it will be, and I'll show you, I'll be completely transparent with how it's spent. This is what it's going to go for, and by God, I promise you that's what it's going to go for. And that kind of closing argument, I think, is a very strong thing in a campaign when you're dealing with an abstract thing like a tax increase.
Anybody else comment on that? Molly?
I would agree. For the youth, I think that you have to make it personal. And again, kudos to the proponents of, you know, trying to simplify the message as much as possible, because it is complicated. And for the average Joe Blow, they don't get it. So you've got to put it in terms of what's best to them. I've had friends who are opposing it, not necessarily because they're anti-tax, but because they're worried about the transparency issue that Mr. Vickery just brought up. They don't know exactly how it's going to be spent, so they're as hesitant to approve something that they don't know where exactly it's going to go. But I would just say for the proponents, again, trying to encourage youth, just make it personal to us and how, you know, what our perks are of it.
All right, let's ask the audience. Anyone that wants to ask the panel a question, or members of the press want to ask somebody a question? Yes, ma'am. Let us wait till we get the microphone to you, okay? She's coming with the microphone.
Yes, Mr. Roberts mentioned about the...
Hold the microphone up close to you, please.
Okay. You mentioned about the park, okay, the research park. And I think that one thing that would help to sell this even more is the idea that in certain time intervals, there would be a proof of concept, how you've spent the money and what the taxpayer has gotten. Transparency, I underline also what the...
Just a little bit with some past history. And Carol Willis and I served time on the governor's staff many years ago, and I got sent off to an economic development meeting in 1984. Why they sent me, I don't know, because I dealt with prisons, but they sent me off out there. And we had just passed those old people in the room, remember the 1983 education session. One of the things we built was a big engineering tech building out there at UALR. Paid $13 million for it. And I was as proud as anybody could be. And I was talking to a guy from Georgia, and I was telling him about this big engineering tech building we built. And he said, well, let me tell you about what we're doing. We've been trying to recruit a company down here in Atlanta, and they needed a lab, and the General Assembly just built a $15 million lab for them on the Georgia Tech campus. I went away with my tail between my legs, and I have felt ever since then that if you're really going to get in the high-tech business, which we keep saying we're going to do, You got to spend a lot of money on it, a lot of money on it. It's the right thing to do, but people need to understand that the $27 million is a down payment on a gift that runs way out. It has a public board that's not been talked about. It is a public entity. It's going to be partnered with the university. I frankly would have asked UALR and UAMS to match this money before I released it, but they didn't talk to me about it. But I would have made it bigger than what it is. It's the minimalist part of it that hurts, I think. And so it hasn't been explained to the public, and it would be a shame to see that capital go down over what in the long run is a good issue for us, just like the port was. It's taken the port 40 or 50 years to begin to pay a return on that investment. It's a long-term deal, and we don't think in the long term. We got to get people to do that, but we got to be honest with them that this is just a start. This is just a down payment on what it's going to take, and I just don't think it's been marketed very well to the public. I think if the public understood it, they would feel differently about it. But it's just not been marketed very well, and it would be a shame to see it drag that capital down, and it may well do it.
Anybody else want to comment on that? All right, next question. Phyllis, we're bringing the microphone to you.
I thought I heard you say, Bobby Roberts, that this is a
Talk right into it, please.
Bobby Roberts, I thought I heard you say that this was a masterful campaign, and I thought I heard you say that it was a perfectly strategized campaign. Well, my opinion is that the first page says, what? Safer neighborhoods? And so that in itself says to me that the tax increase is marketed to the Black and Hispanic citizens as an increase in police. And police certainly aren't our friends.
Anybody want to comment on that? Carol?
Well, I don't necessarily agree with the fact that the police are not necessarily our friends. Where I live, I think the police are quite my friends. They show up when I call. In fact, they show up a lot of times when I don't call. And I feel much better when they are there than when they are not there. I think we have to be very careful here that we don't turn this thing into a racial divide thing, whether it's with West Little Rock getting better police protection or the Central City getting better police and fire protection. I think it's for people like you to ask questions like that you just asked to ensure that does not happen. And I think that a lot of us have been around long enough to know the mayor and the city manager, and I think they know that we will let them know if that is something that we don't necessarily agree with. But I think one of the things that we have got to do, even with this national debate, is that we cannot polarize community. It doesn't make me any different whether, I use this analogy all the time, it doesn't make me any difference whether West Little Rock gets $1 million as long as my part of the city gets $999. Don't make me any difference. We get the same thing. As long as we get the same thing that everybody else is getting. And again, you have an opportunity to influence the kind of policeman that you got. I was talking to a policeman this morning who used to be an old-time policeman, I say, who knew the neighborhood, who used to walk the neighborhood, who knew everybody in every club and everybody at every church. And he knew if a guy that was walking the street was a little out of his mind a little bit, he didn't necessarily go beat him over his head or throw him in jail. He'd take him home or take him to his family. I think we have to get back into these interpersonal relationships. I think government can foster that by getting the right kind of people. Now, you ensure that by being community activists. We don't have to be confrontational. Now, I've been a confrontational person all my life, right, to some degree. But I also learned in this process of life that everything is not a confrontational issue, that we can negotiate, we can work out some deals, and we as, quote, used to be leaders of our community, can get some things done by talking to people in power. We have the power to elect or unelect the mayor and his staff. That's some pretty strong power. So I don't think that we're gonna get caught up in all of this divisions of neighborhoods. In America today, we are in a situation where the term middle class no longer applies. You're either rich or you poor. Ain't no middle class no more. So all poor folks are in the same bag. Rich folks are doing well. But those of us who used to be middle class or upper middle class, we all poor. So we have got to band together and to make this deal work for the benefit of not only us here today, but the young lady down here hit it on the head. I mean, this ain't about Carol Willis. I'm 62 years old. This is about these young people coming on and whether we can put together some kind of structure where they can operate a city, a county, a state in a cohesive unit where when Bobby Robinson and I in the nursing home, somebody will come by and bring us a Diet Coke. So that is
Vickery will do that. He's a young guy.
that is
Molly will take care of me. Vickery can take care of you.
That's my argument for that. I appreciate your question. I think those kind of questions have to be asked. One of the other things that this thing does is that there is a provision in this thing for pensions for non-uniform employees of the city of Little Rock. Now, you know who the non-uniform employees of the city of Little Rock are? They us. They look like me and you. I would guess 85% of them are probably black. So we got to look at that aspect of it too. At the same time, when you talk about economic development in West Little Rock is totally different from what we define as economic development. There's an opportunity here to be a tourist attraction where black folks can go back to what 9th Street used to be. We can put together the mom and pop operation that can employ 5 or 6 people in a tourism atmosphere. You can say to the city, help us revive 12th Street, or help us get some shops down in the Clinton Quarter, where the Clinton Library is and where the Health Project is, and what all this boom around here is about. Let us participate in the whole ball of wax, not the police end of it, not the fire end of it, not the clogged drains end of it. Give us an opportunity to participate in the entire project. And I think that this administration, again, the mayor I've known for 30 years, the city manager I've known for 25 years, other members in the city government, they are responsive. At least they respond if you go down. If you don't, if they ain't responsive to them, to you, you ain't raising enough hell with them. Give them a little bit more. It's as simple as that.
Bill?
Yes, I agree with the giving hell to the mayor. Could we? Just kidding. Look, I think it's this. You noted the safer neighborhoods, safer thing. Look, that's a campaign technique that I think is what the campaign should be based on. And it's unfortunate that when we think of safer neighborhoods, somebody at the Heights thinks about not having their golf clubs stolen out of the back of their Range Rover, and somebody in another neighborhood thinks about not having bullets coming through their house and hitting one of their kids. And that's, but the technique is to try to bring everybody together under that one umbrella. That's the diversity that exists. That's the situation that exists. But it's a strong and powerful technique to try to appeal to both groups. That's that.
Time for one more question. Ms. Abrams, are you going to be objective? I'm just kidding. One moment, get your.
First, I want to thank you. I came so that I could get some additional ammunition for voter education. I'd like for you to help me with one, Jerry Bill. I'd like for you to help me for saying that the people in this room are the ones who are the informed voter people. They know the issues. Now, what they need is sometimes how to teach it to somebody else. In other words, you be an ambassador. Do you agree that if you're in an environment where there is some trust, because some of us have not done our part unto those much is given, much is required, do you believe that if we can help interpret that others don't know about, who are registered voters, which we have done, we got a good voter base, do you believe that we can, in the next 10 days, help those as ambassadors or teachers, educators, interpreters for this campaign? Would that make the difference? of helping people who we know don't have the same level of citizenship education on this issue. The second thing is, Carol, am I correct when I say that we certainly cannot say that poor people are against this tax? I was opposed to the lottery first, but the research shows that if that was true, the poor people are the ones that's participating the most for the purpose of their children to get an education. But in order to get dividends on that investment, the lottery ticket, your child has to qualify. So how do we help people to understand who are the lottery advocates, the lottery participants, to understand this investment is wiser than the one that they're doing, going and standing in lines to vote by their lottery money? How do you do that? And then, Bobby, the question I'd ask of you is, how do you help those who really don't know, who may have a master's degree, cannot interpret futuristic planning? And I say that because I remember, and Skip knows how hard it was for those of us who are visionary to understand what it meant to develop the River Market, to develop the Clinton Library, and many of the things that now folks would kill you about if you tried to take them back. How do you help people to remember how visionary people help you? Like we used to have 50 for the future. It takes 50 years of futuristic planning to get to where we're sitting here today. And Molly, my question is to you. You are sitting as a beneficiary of things that Mary McGowan and I fought for years ago. And so you're sitting here. What obligation do you feel to pay back for the benefit of you being able to go to the Clinton School of Public Service and get your master's in public service?
I think we ought to put Professor Abrams on our faculty staff here. All right, Molly, why don't you start first? You got the most recent question.
Well, I think part of giving back is being an ambassador. I can scream, but I can also use this. I
can hear you
and,
very well.
Thanks. And being a proponent of issues that are vital to the future of our city. So I think those two questions, your first and then the question directed at me, go hand in hand. And so that's how I plan to give back to this community, which I love.
Oh, Andy, very quickly, I hearken back to the library system. In 1993, we ran the first 4 millages that the library had run in 30 years. This is a ratty old system. It was falling in. It was hard for anybody to look at it and think it was worth anything, except we had an excellent staff. And that was what I call a trust me election. People had to, it was like if they build it, they will come theory. I think that's exactly the position the city's in. The city's in financial trouble. It's not providing the services that most citizens think it should, not because they don't want to, but they don't have the money to do it. And so you've got to convince those voters that are going to come out, and particularly if you get up above about 20,000 where you got people coming out that you haven't talked with, is can you trust the city to spend this money wisely? Do you feel that the leadership of the city is going to be able to do this? And that's a trust issue, and it's an intangible thing that you have to do. As far as thinking far ahead, if you go back again, I can only use my own experience in the library. We passed our first millage in 1993. I would say it was about 2015, probably is 2015, 2005, before the public got their money out of what they had spent on the library for 12 or 13 years. It takes that long for an institution to grow. You can't grow it immediately. And you're not going to, with this passes, and I think it will, the city's not going to turn around right away. But you've got to think, you've got to get people thinking down the line. But we all think in the short run. We all live in the short run. We don't live in the long run, and it's a very difficult thing to do. But you have to see some results, and then you can look further down the road. And I think that's what the research park will do, frankly.
Ms. Abrams, one thing I think you do is you don't ever correlate poor with being dumb, because some of the smartest people that I know got a 5th grade education, and it can educate me in more ways than I can ever dream of. So I don't think we're talking about people that do not unnecessarily understand. I think we suffer from the lack of people going out and explaining it to them. So to answer your question, I think everybody in this room, I'll answer you the same way I answered a question to a guy from the New York Times once. He asked me, he said, well, how do you, he was Asian American. He said, how do you fight racism? And I said, what you do is you appoint yourself as a committee of one to carry the message. And then let somebody else appoint themselves as a committee of one. Because this is something that's going to be, it's a one-on-one deal. You know, my opinion of this young lady right here might be totally different in a different kind of setting. Hers of me might be a totally different kind of setting. What I say up here today might twist somebody one way when I'm a totally different kind of person. So I think you have to give that person that individual touch. When the little lady comes to my door, and you know, they come a lot because I live in the middle of the hood, so I have to sit there and try to explain it to them. But at the same time, I have to try to figure out a way to explain it in the way they understand what I'm saying. And at the same time, I have to try to explain to them that I have your best interest at heart. Now, the only way I think that you can do that is you got to have a track record. You got to have credibility over a given period of time for people to listen for you. And it goes back to what Vickery said earlier. You trust people, you trust government. It's a question of trust. The biggest question in this election is whether we trust Mark Stoller, whether we trust Bruce Moore to do what they say this tax is going to do. I think a lot of us do. Until they prove otherwise, then we get back to the confrontational move, right? So I think, to answer your question in short, appoint yourself as a committee of one, whether it's at the church, whether it's at the sororities or fraternities, or whatever it is you do, whether it's at the juke joint, whether it's at the crap house, and make no mistake about it. All these places have people of influence. The guy down the street that shoots dice on the corner has as much influence as a bunch of preachers do over a given constituency of people. So you got to reach out to all these people, and you got to convalesce them into thinking that this is a benefit for the entire community. What helps me at 18th and Cross helps somebody out in West Little Rock or in Southwest Little Rock, that it's going to be a coalition of all of us working together to make this city a better place. You know, one of the things I like about Little Rock, when people ask me where I'm from, first thing I tell them I'm from McGee. They don't understand that, right? So I say, I'm from Arkansas. They don't understand that. But I'm from Little Rock. They understand that. I'm not from anywhere else. I'm proud to be from Little Rock. When we were taking the hits, Skip, about being deadbeat country hicks chewing tobacco, we were from Arkansas. You got to be from Little Rock. You got to be from your neighborhood. You as individuals have to sell this program. The mayor has done he's done his political work. His consultant has done their work. It is now down to Joe Q people to make this thing work.
Bill?
Well, I think I know better than to give you any advice. I should ask you for some. I want, honestly, everyone, by show of hands, if you think both of these issues will pass. Fail? That took guts, lady. That took guts in this room. No, I think that you have to approach political campaigns practically. That you can't try to apply a level of idealism, whether that be conservative or liberal, on top of a political campaign. You know, I don't get mad at Barry Brandt because it rained on Saturday. You know, he's the weatherman. Look, there's a practical element to this campaign in this political environment that has to be understood and planned for. And I mean, I hate to be the bad guy here. I hate to always keep being the bad guy, but I just don't see it passing. I don't see it passing. I think that it is too difficult a task. The noble goals and the noble issues that are at stake have a very difficult time in the environment that we're in. It's hard for somebody to see them being president of the United States when they worry about if they're going to have lunch or not. And we're at a stage in the city that's very critical, and I understand that. But if you lay over the top of that how most people look at their families and their family planning and all the engagement that they have from an economic standpoint, from a job standpoint, all of that, it is an incredibly difficult political environment to pass something like this. So I think it's important, it's critical, but I think that the environment is such that it's, and I applaud, by the way, you can't make decisions based on the political environment all the time. I mean, you have issues at hand, no doubt about it. But this is an environment that is unbelievably difficult to try to pass something like this.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to this community conversation, this panel on the Little Rock sales tax initiatives. I want to thank Molly, Bobby, Carol, and Bill, and I hope everybody votes. Thank you all for being with us.